You may be seated. Well, the final line of that gospel reading sort of takes all the air out of the room, right? We hear that that admonition: the righteous will go to eternal reward, the unrighteous will go to eternal punishment. And so many of us hear that and we wonder, which group am I? Right? We have this reaction where we're like, well, am I one of the righteous or am I not? Which one would I go to? Or some of you know where you're going. And whether that's you're patting yourself on the back, I had a really good week this week, or whether that's you're beating yourself up for a week where maybe you were in fact the hungry and the thirsty, the sick and the imprisoned, the naked and the stranger, and that you needed some care. We get so fixated on that imagery that Jesus uses around this story that I think there's a bit of a danger of us missing the point. And so I'm going to come back to that imagery later, but I don't want the imagery, the sort of bookends around it, the little details peppered through it, to distract you from what the main point is of this, for lack of a better word, parable. Right? The main point is repeated 4 times in this gospel. Jim Richardson last week reminded us of this, spoke to this. Jesus tells us 4 times that he is to be found, that the Christ is to be found amongst the hungry and the thirsty. That you encounter the Christ in the naked, in the stranger, in those who are sick, and those in prison. 4 times that's repeated over and over again. Let me see if I can drive it home one more way with you. Jesus is saying, I am to be found at your Wednesday night dinner and your Friday morning respite center, where the hungry, the thirsty come for some food and a little bit of water and coffee. Jesus is saying that you will find me down the street at that giant Sutter Memorial Hospital, where there are so many people in beds, on ventilators, in ICU units, just struggling to survive. Christ is to be found there. The Christ, when you welcome the stranger, the Greek there is even stronger. The Greek there is when you welcomed the foreigner, the immigrant, the alien. Christ is to be found there. That Christ is found in the naked. I don't have a good church example for that for you, but it needs to be said, amongst the naked. That Christ is to be found in prisons. And I don't know about you, but my projective judgment on prisons is that they're filled with people that are very not Christ-like. And yet Christ says that I am to be found in the prisons. And if that offends you, it probably was supposed to. That Christ is found in these places that we might not expect. In fact, as I think about that list of places Christ is to be found, it reminds me of the Beatitudes, which is interesting because in Matthew's Gospel, what we're reading from, the Beatitudes are the very beginning of Christ's teaching. The Gospel reading we just read is the very end of his teaching. After this parable is all the events of the Passion, all the events of Jesus' death and resurrection. And so the actual teaching that happens in Matthew seems to be bookended between the Beatitudes and this parable. The Beatitudes, of course, say, blessed are the hungry and the thirsty for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the meek and the humble. Blessed are those who mourn and grieve, for they will be comforted. Blessed are you when people revile you and hate you and persecute you on my account, for they did the same to the prophets who came before you. Do you hear the parallels? Yeah. So there seems to be these parallels, right, between these Beatitudes that begin the teaching of Jesus at the beginning of Matthew, and then this parable that comes to the end. And together, for me, that points me to the truth that I find Christ, that we find Christ in those moments of weakness, those moments of vulnerability, those tender moments of our lives. That in fact, I am closest to Christ, or I encounter Christ when I am hungry and thirsty. When I am naked, I think what we mean by that is all the moments in our lives where we feel exposed and vulnerable, right? Where there is nothing left to protect me from the judgment and the scorn and the shame of the world, right? That indeed I encounter Christ when I am in my own prison, because prisons come in many forms, not just with jail cells, right? And you might know this truth, that you find Christ in those deep, weak, vulnerable, hard moments of life. They are the moments of life that are the dark night of the soul, those moments where we cry out ourselves, my God, why have you forsaken me? It is those moments, and it is precisely maybe in the fact that a loved one, a family member, a friend at church, a friend who's not churched at all, and you wouldn't maybe think of them, but they came and they cared for you, and they showed you love and compassion. They fed you and clothed you and visited you. Perhaps that is where Christ was found in those moments in your life, but perhaps also Christ was found in those moments of tenderness and weakness, because it is in those moments that we are challenged most. We are challenged most to not actually give up hope, but to find and seek those little pinpricks of love. Especially in Sacramento, when you look at the night sky, it's a lot of black. It's a lot of black. But there are those little pinpricks, those small lights of love. It is precisely in those moments of great weakness and hardship, when we ourselves have our backs against the wall, that we learn what we are really made of. Do we have the strength to take it just one day, maybe not even that, just 1 hour at a time? Do we have the ability to make it through to the next dawn? When we are sick and in prison, do we try to just get everyone else sick? Do we try to just capture everyone else in our prison? Or do we find it in ourselves, the strength to love and care? We may not have a lot of bandwidth to serve, but to at least love and to care. Right? It is precisely in those moments when we ourselves are hungry, thirsty, strangers and naked, when we are sick and in prison, that we are pushed to discover this love of Christ and the strength of Christ that might reside in you. But that's not often what we seek. Not that we should. Not that we should seek being hungry or thirsty or being naked. Certainly not at church. Not that we should seek those things, but that, in fact, our culture often pushes us to seek something very different. Our culture often pushes us to seek to be strong, to be self-resilient, to be self-reliant, to, I'll say this in a churchy way, to have all our stuff together. Let those who have ears hear. We try, right? We try to be very put together and strong and have all our stuff together. And that's what we think is going to keep us safe. It's what keeps society's approval on us. It seems to be the model that we're all trying to work towards. But I find that kind of strength, perhaps even the strength that we sort of project onto what a king is, right? We often think of a king being strong and independent and having it all together. But that strength often leaves us very alone. That strength often comes with it this great fixation on ourselves. We stay fixated on, what do I need to do so I can be strong? What do I need to do so I can be self-reliant? What do I need to do so it looks like, at least, especially in church, that I have all my stuff together? And it's that fixation on the self, on I, that I think gets us distracted by all that imagery of fire and punishment and heaven and hell. Because when we hear that fixated I goes, which one am I? Right? Where am I going to go? And how do I get my stuff in order, whatever that looks like, get my stuff in order so I make sure I go to the right place and I don't go to the wrong place. It's that fixation on the self which is often rooted in this strong desire to have it all together, which I think sadly, inadvertently, sometimes church also promotes to you. It tells you, or you have this sense that, well, I'm at church. Like, no, I'm not hungry. I'm fed on the bread of Christ. No, I'm not naked. I'm clothed with Christ's love. No, I'm not a stranger. Why would I have ever wandered away from Christ's path? Right? There can be even this promotion in church of trying to, I have to keep it all together and I need to present myself well. That can often distract us from the real meaning that Jesus is directing us to. Because again, Jesus is directing us. Well, here's how I said it earlier. That's better. Notice in Jesus' story that the sheep, when they're told, blessed are you, come into the great kingdom because you cared for all these people. Notice that they don't go, you're right, Jesus, I did. I did a really good job. I cared for all those people. It was really good. Thanks for noticing. Right? The sheep don't do that. The sheep go, when did we do that? When did we feed you that was hungry? When did we give drink to the thirsty? When did we clothe the naked? When did we welcome the stranger? When did we visit the sick and those in prison? They don't know because they weren't worried about I. And whether I was doing it right, and whether I was making it all happen, and whether I had all my stuff together. They did it because they knew that the hungry and the thirsty, the naked and the stranger, those who are sick and those in prison are just like me. They are weak and vulnerable in certain parts of their life, just like I am weak and vulnerable in certain parts of my life. And I care and serve them, not so that way I can be better and I can get the right reward at the end, but they do it because they know that they are them and I am they. They know that indeed we together are weak, have tenderness, have moments where we're hungry and thirsty, exposed to the elements, exposed to human scorn, that we ourselves can be strangers and in prison and sick. And it is out of that knowing of our shared predicament that the true path of strength is to love and to serve one another out of that place of our common family.